Hello and welcome to Wrestling at Random. I'm Jeremy Deemer.
And I am Adam Summers. And you are in the bonus feed during the break between Season 4 and Season 5 to come. As you know, the only place right now, if you're listening in linear fashion, to get new episodes of Wrestling at Random. And as has been the case for months upon months upon months now, it is another intentionalized episode in the bonus feed. And it is an episode that is near and dear to my heart. I'm sure yours as well, Jeremy. I'm always happy when we get a chance to review and watch WCW television, when we get a chance to watch Nitro outside of maybe a year and a half window where that's not the most exciting thing to do. But here, an episode of Nitro from 1998 that is one of the more legendary historic episodes of the show.
Patron Kendall brings you this week's intentionalized pick. This is his favorite episode of WCW Monday Nitro. And after rewatching it, I was trying to decide if it's my favorite episode also. I was trying to think of favorite episodes of Nitro. I mean, you've got the Goldberg Hogan episode was pretty special in the Georgia Dome.
The Goldberg Raven, where Goldberg wins the U.S. title.
The one we reviewed
as well. Yeah.
The problem was the rest of that show was there was like two things on that show that we really liked. I
would say from a story perspective, there's some of those early NWO leading into what's Sting gonna do type of thing, where you still were also.
Yes.
Or, where you were getting a lot of, Dean Malenko, Rey Mysterio type of stuff going on. But yeah, we'll get to it. This definitely belongs on the list and pretty high on the list, I think.
Big time. This is definitely in the top four here. It is WCW Monday Nitro from September 14th, 1998, Season 4, Episode 37, if you're watching on the cock. Before we get into the actual recap of the episode, let's recap on the Ric Flair legal situation with WCW.
We may need another Patreon tier for a podcast just about that. We may go over time.
Dave Meltzer, Wrestling Observer Newsletter, will help me summarize. Ric Flair had been at legal odds with WCW since early April of '98, when he missed a Thunder taping in Tallahassee, when the plan was to have him announce a new Four Horsemen, which was going to be led by himself, Lex Luger, Bill Goldberg, and Kevin Green, managed by Arn Anderson.
What? Wow. I pride myself on knowing all there is to know about WCW history, or history that did not happen, and I had no idea
Me neither.
At this time we were going to have a Horseman that had Goldberg and Lex Luger and Kevin Green?
After Flair missed the April 9th show in Tallahassee and all subsequent appearances, largely over the impasse with WCW, when they ordered him to the show, and he instead went to accompany his son Reed Flair to the national age group where the National Age Group Wrestling Championship in Pontiac, Michigan, where he captured the title in the age 9 and 10 group in the 112-pound weight class. Eric Bischoff had a meeting with the wrestlers on the 13th, so just 4 days later, where he ran down Ric Flair's character, calling him a swerve and a BS artist, and claimed that he was going to sue him into bankruptcy. A few days later, WCW filed a $2 million lawsuit against Ric Flair for no showing the 4 house show dates. Flair later filed motions to have his agreement, which was not a contract, but a signed intent paper that was outlining Flair's pay through early 2001. He would earn $725,000 in 98 and 99, with a maximum of 220 days worked, and $500,000 in the year 2000, with a lower number of working days. And this would serve as a legal agreement until a contract had actually been agreed to. Since no contract had been agreed on, Flair contended that the intent paper was no longer valid since it was based on eventually coming to mutual terms. So Flair was suing WCW. WCW was suing him. And Flair was looking to get out. He was unhappy with how his character was being booked. He had interest in returning to the WWF. The lawsuits were settled months later, which brings us to where we are today, September 14th, 1998.
Well, before it brings us to where we are today, it also brings us to where we were if you're listening in linear fashion on last week's podcast, as the symmetry between that episode of World Championship Wrestling, where we see Ole Anderson kicked out of the Four Horsemen by Ric Flair because he was more concerned with going to his son's athletic endeavors than he was being a horseman and being at wrestling shows. How crazy is it that a week later here on the podcast, we have art imitating life, not life imitating art, but art imitating life involving Ric Flair doing the same thing that the Ole Anderson character did some 11 years prior.
And Ric Flair ended up doing one of the best promos we've ever heard him do there. He's going to turn around and do one of the best promos right here as well, both with the same story. Just one is a wrestling angle and the other is real life. It's eerie, the similarities and how they showed up in the intentionalized picks. Two people who do not know each other outside of this podcast. So.
And did not know that
they did not coordinate these picks.
They did not coordinate these picks. We have a lot of odd synchronicities on this show. This one is pretty close to the top of the list.
This show is the night after Fall Brawl, and we are live from a new arena in Greensville, South Carolina. Greenville, South Carolina had a sellout, 12,236, paying $290,897 at the gate. The show opens with the Nitro girls dancing, and we get a ton of indoor pyro. And this crowd is jacked, and they were amped all night long. This is a great crowd.
This is WCW country to begin with, and then the story of this entire show, which is leaned into very heavily from the very beginning, the opening segment with the announcers at the desk, and throughout the night there are rumors that the Four Horsemen are going to reunite. There are rumors that Ric Flair may be returning to WCW here tonight at the Bilo Center. Mike Tenay is on assignment at the airport, the little municipal airport in Greenville, South Carolina. He tries to interview a limo, which will not roll down its windows. It's hard to interview a car when it won't roll down its windows. He runs up to a plane and tries to interview a pilot. The pilot says no comment, and he has to leave. That takes us back to the desk where they recap what happened at Fall Brawl, where apparently DDP won War Games. The wording here was so strange. War Games is a team battle.
Team versus team. Yes.
4-on-4 or 5 versus 5. But the way they're describing this, it was either every man for himself, or it almost sounds like it was elimination, like a Survivor Series. I don't recall that being the case in either direction. But they're very clear in saying that Diamond Dallas Page won War Games.
And he's going to get a title shot at Halloween Havoc against the winner of tonight's main event. I was confused, but I wasn't concerned enough to go back and look at what actually happened at Fall Brawl. We are told that we are going to see Goldberg defending the World Heavyweight Championship against Sting tonight. Hell yeah, that's a main event anywhere. I'm excited.
One of the few times where you hear it's a main event anywhere in the world, and it is. This isn't like Tommy Rich against Joey Maggs. This is legit.
Mike Tenay, he's out getting the scoop, as Tony said, and we'll find out. And when he mentioned the rumor going around about Flair, the crowd on cue, they cannot hear the announcers in the building, but someone could see that he made a mention of the word Flair by reading lips, and the whole crowd was chanting, "We want Flair."
Possibly. However, though, I do remember that at times they would have back then, during the opening segment where the announcers are at the desk, that would be piped in through the PA, because a lot of times they'd react to when Larry Zbyszko was introduced at the desk, so who knows? But either way, these people were hyped upon hyped for this. You hear about buildings selling out on a rumor in a modern era. That seemed to be the case here in Greenville as well.
We see footage from Thunder, and it's Tenay with the Armstrong brothers, the Scott and Steve varietal.
Yeah,
And
I felt like we were about to get some Party Boys action here if we got Johnny Rich up in the mix.
he did not refer to them as the Party Boys. Ernest the Cat Miller interrupts this immediately, jumps them from behind. Norman Smiley confronts Ernest Miller, and they have a pull apart.
I did appreciate that they tried at least to explain to us why the Armstrongs are being interviewed. They didn't say the Armstrongs are being interviewed on Nitro or even Thunder. That would have been a stretch. They had Mike Tenay saying, "All right, we're gonna shoot this. We're doing this for international television." So I guess the idea that it was like the Germans got the Armstrong brothers promos here. You said we have Ernest Miller show up. This is really the beginning of his heel turn. He barefoot kicks them until Norman Smiley breaks it up. I thought that was going to lead immediately to a Ernest Miller match, but instead we go to the ring, and it is heel Alex Wright, which became amazing. It had a bit of a rocky start, but once he figured it out, basically being the exact same character as babyface Alex Wright, but just slightly more obnoxious. It is that Alex Wright taking on. At first, I got excited because I thought, oh my God, Stunning Steve Austin is back in WCW. But no, it was a tease. It was the old Stunning Steve Austin, Hollywood Blondes music. But instead, it was the hippie version of Van Hammer.
So we did get Alex Wright dancing, which always gets a pop from me. And then the hippie version of Van Hammer. He's no longer metal. He's not a metal kid anymore. I immediately get angry because you cannot hear the ring announcer, David Penzer. I've mentioned this on every single review of Nitro we do. I'm going to do it again right here. It's my biggest complaint about WCW Nitro. I love Nitro, but this is always my biggest complaint. The ring announcer just goes over the house PA, not directly into the TV feed, so you can never hear what he says, and the announcers, the play-by-play guys just talk right over him anyway. And so it is my biggest pet peeve. I hate it so much.
Yeah, it's not good. It's something that no promotion should, from a production standpoint, should ever be emulating. This match is not much. However, there is one of the weirdest spots I have ever seen in a professional wrestling match. About midway through, Alex Wright whips Van Hammer into the corner. He seems to think that Van Hammer is going to come out of the corner and run back toward him in the center of the ring. So he jumps up for a drop kick, again, assuming that Hammer is going to meet him in the middle of the ring and eat this drop kick. Hammer, however, stays in the corner, and Alex Wright, the only way I can describe this is that he adjusts in mid-air of this drop kick to doing the Alex Wright dance and lands on his feet. It almost looks like a video game glitch. It didn't look good, but it should have looked so much worse than it did.
Something else that didn't look good. Nick Patrick is your referee, and his hair is aggressively slicked back. There's a lot of products going on here for Nick Patrick. That makes
me uncomfortable. I don't know why. I saw that and I thought the same thing. Like, this is even more leaned into Nick Patrick's sleeves than him reffing at NWO Sold Out 97. This is not a good look.
The other thing I noticed production-wise, not a lot of bounce to this WCW ring. Underratedly firm, this WCW ring.
Well, this is also the infamous trapdoor WCW ring. We'll see One Warrior Nation make an appearance later on.
It was the night before at that Fall Brawl show that Davey Boy Smith broke his back. We'll talk about it a little bit later.
It works on this show, and boy, could you tell.
Yeah, we'll talk about it when we get there in a little bit more detail. Ernest the Cat Miller makes his way out, takes out Van Hammer with a karate kick. Ref throws this match out. Alex Wright just walks away. Doug Dillinger and security take Ernest Miller out of there. They arrest him for doing a run-in and put him in a cop car and take him away.
That's the type of rule enforcement I want to see in modern wrestling. Throw Yujiro Takahashi and Dick Togo and Evil in a police car, take him away, take him to jail so I don't have to see it. I endorse this reaction to a run-in.
They show us some still photos from the War Games match. We're told Bret Hart was injured in the match. He really was not. This was a worked injury for Bret Hart.
This War Games looked awful. 1992 Sting Squadron versus Dangerous Alliance. This was not.
Reviewed here in the bonus feed. You can go back and listen to our coverage of that. Gene Okerlund is in the ring. He welcomes Bret Hart out. He's the U.S. champion, and he's limping. He says that he listened to the wrong people, calls Hogan scum. This is legit Bret Hart trying to do a babyface turn. He says he didn't earn the title. He didn't deserve it. He'll be back, and he's going to make Hogan's life a living hell. At this point, Rowdy Roddy Piper makes his way down to the ring. Piper gives him the I told you so speech. He says, prove to the people who you are. Don't let them down again. And this was a pretty darn good promo by Piper, except he makes a mention about the American people forgiving Bill Clinton, and that kind of derails this babyface promo as everybody boos.
But Piper would always, I feel like around this time, try to work in like pop culture or political references, things that were in the zeitgeist, but that was not what people are looking for out of this babyface promo from Roddy Piper.
Bret Hart asks the people for another chance.
It was good. Both guys did a great job, but it was two guys doing a great job on a promo in a situation that should not have existed. They were doing this promo because Bret Hart was turned heel shortly after he came into WCW. Nobody wanted to see a heel Bret Hart coming off of the screw job at Survivor Series 1997. So okay, this is an effective way in theory to get the fans back on his side, but nobody wanted to see me as a heel in the first place. So all it did was cool him off for whatever was going to be coming, including this.
Saturn beat Raven at Fall Brawl and freed the flock. Saturn is out now to take on Kendall Windham, and this is the least skinny I've ever seen Kendall Windham.
And he still is very skinny. Like, he's the least skinny you've ever seen him, and he still is skinnier than the skinniest Barry Windham, who was skinny. He is wearing jeans. This is before Rap is Crap, I believe, but this is still jeans. Kendall Windham. It's another one of those guys that you just can't believe was in WCW in 1998 if you didn't live through it. Like Chris Adams, who we saw in an episode of Thunder that we reviewed not that long ago. This match.
This was bad. This was real bad.
This was terrible. Not the fault of Perry Saturn.
No.
This was bad, and this went on and on and on.
And Kendall Windham, Kendall took 80% of this match. Horrible.
Absolutely confounding. You have Perry Saturn get this huge win, beating Raven, freeing the flock, in theory, ending this feud. And then the next night, it doesn't even have a 10-minute 50-50 match with Kendall Windham. He is getting beaten down by very, very basic offense. This match, Kendall Windham against Perry Saturn, went through a commercial break.
Horrible.
That's how long this was.
Finally, Saturn wins with a Death Valley driver. Horace Hogan, Riggs, Sick Boy, Lodi, and Kidman all come out to the former flock. Raven is there. He's in the balcony with Canyon, and he says the joke's over. You had your 24 hours of freedom. That's done. Saturn reminds them that they're actually free, and Saturn gives them all a pep talk. He tells Sick Boy he's a future star, so Saturn didn't get them all. He was wrong in his analysis there. But
to be fair, I think a lot of us during that time period thought there was a lot more there to Sick Boy than there ended up being.
After commercial, Wrath versus the Renegade.
The Renegade is still in World Championship Wrestling in September of 1998. The fake Ultimate Warrior
is there when the real Ultimate Warrior is in WCW.
And he did not end up being a part of the One Warrior Nation. This is amazing.
No, because there were two Warriors then.
Yes.
So
you mentioned that it's Wrath taking on a jacked up and shockingly old-looking Renegade. the thing I noticed right away, other than the fact that Wrath, used to be Adam Bomb, he'd go on to be one half of Chronic. He was massively over at this time, getting like a mini version of the Goldberg undefeated streak push. The other thing when I saw him here is how much, whether it's knowingly or unknowingly, Wardlow has borrowed just from the look and the overall presentation and demeanor of Wrath, but how much he could benefit from borrowing more of the intensity that Wrath had here.
Yeah, very much so. And, we were both, I think, a little surprised at how popular Wrath was at this point in time. We were super surprised when we saw how popular Chronic was back when we reviewed that WCW show from 2000. When they were tag team champions. So we're always surprised by how over this guy is. But Wrath, all the Brian Clark incarnations here, always popular. And here he was no different. Wrath kills the guy. It was fun. Renegade tries a handspring elbow, and Wrath just laughs at it and hits his pump handle power slam for the easy victory.
The meltdown, which I like as a little callback to the fact that he was Adam Bomb in the World Wrestling Federation.
The NWO theme song plays for the first time tonight, and it's Eric Bischoff, Miss Elizabeth, Hulk Hogan, and the Disciple, the former Brutus the Barber Beefcake. They all make their way out.
Dizzy Ed Boulder for people that listen to this podcast.
Dizzy Ed Boulder, the former man with no name, also from this
Butcher.
podcast. Bischoff laughs about Flair not being there. Calls Bret Hart a sissy. He calls the Warrior a coward. And yes, the Ultimate Warrior. Warrior snuck up on him, robbed him of his shot at Goldberg. Hogan challenges Warrior for a match at Halloween Havoc, a match that would go down as one of the worst matches in wrestling history. The ring fills with smoke. The smoke clears, but no Warrior and no Disciple. He's missing.
Talk about the biggest babyface turn a wrestler could ever have. Disappearing the Disciple, Ed Leslie, from my television screen. I've never been a bigger Warrior fan than I was here. This was dumb, but the crowd enjoyed it. Like, the match was terrible, and to a lot of people, all this stuff with the Warrior, One Warrior Nation, all the smoke, all whatever, it was stupid, but the fans did enjoy it, and that's even here in Greenville. Like, to start, this wasn't an utter disaster, even if it was not my cup of tea. The thing that was more confounding than anything is why Miss Elizabeth was out there wearing jeans with leather chaps over them. Odd look.
We're back for hour number 2. We get more pyro, more We Want Flair chants again, and we're told Kaz Hayashi cannot compete tonight, Adam. Sorry, no Kaz Hayashi. However, Billy Kidman is going to take his spot and face the Cruiserweight champion, Juventud Guerrera.
You have to keep in mind, this is Billy Kidman, fresh off of being a member of the Flock. This is still Billy Kidman, like days removed from constantly scratching himself because he never took a bath. Here he has his white tank top instead of his dirty, holy black t-shirt. He has no entrance music. He comes out to no fanfare, but he is getting a title shot here against Juventud Guerrera. Juvi comes out, and I immediately notice what it says on his tights. And I'm like, was Juventud Guerrera at Lilith Fair with me in 1998? It says Sweet Surrender on the back of his trunks. Is he a Sarah McLachlan guy too?
This was a fun back and forth match. Early, Juvi goes to the top, hits a missile dropkick. Kidman rolls out to the floor. And immediately you're thinking, holy cow, the speed difference from everything else on this show up to this point, it's a completely different pace, and something that made WCW so special at this point in time is how they could completely change the dynamic by putting the cruiserweights out there.
It's, in a nutshell, what I loved about Nitro. The Hogan, Piper, those guys I didn't really have a whole lot of time for, but you knew on a good Nitro, and even more so on a great Nitro, you know you are going to see at least one match of this level, usually for the Cruiserweight title. You might get a wild, wacky Lucha 6-man tag. You might get, Lord Steven Regal against a Cruiserweight for the TV title. Like, this was the type of stuff that made Nitro really stand out from episodes of Raw, which we've reviewed before. We've talked about either there was no equivalent of the Cruiserweight division, or it was, Brian Christopher against Scott Taylor or something. It was nothing like what you were seeing on Nitro here, and this was another example.
Yeah, this was this match got real great as Kidman cuts off Juvi with a wacky backbreaker, hits a power slam for 2. Kidman standing near the ropes, Juvi with a crossbody, and both men go tumbling over the top to the outside. After commercial, Mike Tenay has joined the broadcast team. He's in the building now. Kidman with a big drop kick, and he slingshots himself from the apron back into the ring with a leg drop. Kidman tries to German suplex Juvi, but he lands on his feet. Kidman follows right up with a sit-out powerbomb for a great near fall. The crowd is really getting into this, and they're getting into Kidman. Now, Juventude's the babyface here, and people are turning on him because they want success for Kidman here.
It's another great example of you put guys in the ring and have a great match, the fans will get invested. Yes, Juvi was already super over. Kidman had been really a complete afterthought. He had just left the flock, but we had never actually seen Kidman in this role. We had never seen him as a babyface, but this match was getting to be so awesome as it went along that, to your point, the fans were dying to see Billy Kidman win. They were very invested in this Cruiserweight title match.
Juvi hits a German suplex, goes to the top rope. He leaps off the top and hits a Rana on Kidman, gets a 2. We get a Juvi driver that's countered into an inverted suplex for 2. Kidman goes to the top. He's going for his move, the shooting star press, but he gets crotched on the top. We get a top rope Frankensteiner by Juvi. He goes to the top again, but Kidman catches Juvi with a power bomb.
In midair. Juvi comes off the top, and he counters with this power bomb in midair. Just going back to that reverse suplex, just to kind of reiterate your point about the crowd, long 2 count for Kidman on that reverse suplex, and the crowd is booing the fact that this was not a 3 count. They, in a matter of minutes, had gone from not really caring about Billy Kidman to being desperate to see him win the Cruiserweight Championship. That's how good this match was.
So after that powerbomb, he goes to the top, and he hits his shooting star press off the top. Kidman gets the pin. The place goes crazy. New Cruiserweight champion. Saturn's out there to celebrate. The people are loving new Cruiserweight champion Billy Kidman. And this was a total coming out party for Kidman as a single. This is like a star-making moment for him. And it worked. It was a 4-star match from Dave Meltzer, pre-star inflation. This is big. This was a big deal, and just the kind of stuff that can just happen on a Nitro is a great match shows up between 2 cruiserweights.
Yeah, not only a great match, but a great match that absolutely made Billy Kidman, like you said. Billy Kidman would go on to be wildly popular in WCW from this point forward. The fans were always with him, even when he was in stupid storylines, whatever. Like, he went from being like an undercard afterthought cruiserweight guy to in one night being on the level of Juventud Guerrero, Rey Mysterio, Eddie Guerrero, all those guys. And a large part of it was this match, what they did the night before with him leaving the flock, being freed from the flock, and then Juvi giving him a great match and putting him over for the Cruiserweight title.
Backstage, Gene Okerlund sees J.J. Dillon in a tux, and he wants to know, was he with Ric Flair? Was Ric Flair going in that room? And J.J. says, there's a surprise coming later. Jackie Chan gives us a clip of his new movie, Rush Hour. That's opening this weekend.
I like how Larry Zbyszko is trying to get the rubs, saying that he's friends with Jackie Chan. I've seen Larry Zbyszko martial arts. I don't believe that.
Eddie Guerrero confronts Eric Bischoff in the back. Bischoff says, you don't want to work here? Fine. You're going to go to Japan. And he's sending him on a tour. So he's going to have to miss his kids' birthdays and such.
Well, I don't know about missing the kids' birthdays, but considering what Eddie Guerrero legitimately was feeling about WCW at this point, in storyline, Eddie Guerrero asks for his release, and Eric Bischoff sends him on a tour of Japan. That's like the ultimate, don't threaten me with a good time. I'm sure Eddie Guerrero would have been much more happy wrestling in New Japan at this point than in WCW. So I'm sure he was fine.
The Barbarian with Jimmy Hart versus the British Bulldog, Davey Boy Smith. We mentioned earlier, Davey Boy Smith suffered a serious back injury as a result of his bad bump on the trap door that the Warrior would come into the ring in. That happened at WCW Fall Brawl 1998.
Wasn't the story also that the wrestlers were not informed of this modification to the ring? I could be wrong, but I recall that was part of it, was that the wrestlers weren't told that they were going to be bumping on a part of the ring, which I assume if it has a trap door, it's going to be either hollow under or it's going to be harder. There's obvious issues with that.
Yeah, a spinal infection followed, resulting in him having a 6-month stay in the hospital.
Jesus. But he still wrestled this next night after that.
Yeah, many consider this series of events pivotal in the British Bulldog also developing his substance abuse issues to cope with the pain in the aftermath of this injury.
It's very believable because if you watch this match, oh my God, you are watching a wrestler that should not be in the ring, that is gutting it out, but is clearly not just in intense pain, but it is clear that there is something seriously structurally wrong with his back. He should not be near the building, much less inside the ropes.
Jimmy Hart got some cheap shots in on the Bulldog. Bulldog goes for his power slam, but Hart grabs the leg of the Barbarian. He gets punched by the Bulldog. The Barbarian goes for his big boot. Bulldog gives him a power slam, kinda, and gets the win. This was sad to watch him try to do this power slam.
Very sad. Sad is the word, particularly when we look at all the Davey Boy Smith matches that we've seen on this show, sometimes including matches where Dynamite Kid was broken down and Davey was having to carry the load and looked great, like the best you've ever seen him. To see him here so physically compromised and knowing how it happened and knowing how avoidable that situation should have been, and then knowing everything that happened later, including painkillers and everything else, just really depressing to see this on multiple levels.
J.J. Dillon in a tux is in the ring with Gene Okerlund. He tells us that we're going to get Steiner versus Steiner at Halloween Havoc. And then we hear the laughing over the PA system. We talked about this on our recap of Thunder that we did in the free feed. It is Chucky, the killer doll crossover movie thing that they did. Terrible, with Rick Steiner. One of the legendary horrible things. This was the start of that in building to Halloween Havoc.
The other part about this so you've got the whole, the first hour plus they're talking about, Horsemen are going to reform. Ric Flair might be back. J.J. Dillon clearly is very much a part of that from the backstage segments that we've seen. When J.J. Dillon is in the ring with Gene Okerlund, the last thing I'm thinking they're going to be talking about is Steiner versus Steiner. This was a letdown. This was a tease for what we're going to get later, I guess.
We see clips from a Nitro party video, and I always laugh that this was a big deal. People got together for Nitro parties. I went to my friends' houses and watched Nitro, and it was a big deal.
It was a real legit thing. This is not some made
every
up
Monday
thing WCW would do and hire actors. There would be Nitro parties all across the country. A lot of times on college campuses. We talked about that in a previous Nitro review. It was a big part of it. And you see it in these crowds. How young, and I don't mean like young kids, but how young as far as late teens into mid to late 20s the WCW audience was, in addition to your traditional wrestling fans that had been around.
Bobby Heenan joins the broadcast. Jim the Anvil Neidhart comes out. We hear the NWO music. Smoke fills the ring, and the Warrior appears in the ring. Neidhart just walks away and leaves. So I have no idea what he was going to do.
Well, yeah, there's a few things. We have no idea which random member of the NWO he was going to wrestle. I'm assuming Vincent. Also, the smoke apparently does not affect everyone the same way, in that the smoke goes off and he's fine. He's just able to leave of his own volition and go to the back. However, Ed Leslie, the disciple, met a different fate as he's in the ring under the Warrior, maybe dead. It's hard to tell.
Definitely napping. He's.
Yes.
We then. Yeah, so the NWO comes down and Warrior cuts this promo, and you could see the crowd. He loses the crowd here. He accepts Hogan's challenge for Halloween Havoc.
Yeah, it's too much Warrior being Warrior talking. The people are with the idea of the Warrior coming back to wrestle Hogan, and with each passing week that he spoke and went on and on and on, he lost them more and more. He's saying we can choose to live as warriors or ordinary men. He starts talking about the One Warrior Nation revolution and warriors and courage as he was straddling Ed Leslie. This was not good.
Not good. Silver King and Norman Smiley take on Scott Steiner in a handicap match. He's accompanied by Buff Bagwell.
That feels like a little bit too high-end talent to be jobbers in a handicap match. I was offended.
Yeah, especially we've seen like a build for Norman Smiley to Ernest the Cat Miller,
Yes.
and he gets squashed here. Double Steiner recliner for the quick victory.
My favorite thing about this match is as it's ending and we're seeing the replay, we get a Zane Bresloff shout out from Tony, Bobby, and Mike today, commending Zane Bresloff for his work booking the Bilo Center and all these buildings.
So more Nitro girls, send in your tapes, and I'm seeing them say send in your tapes to your Nitro party. And all I can think of is the poor bastard that has to watch all these Nitro Party tapes to pick a winner. Because I bet they got a ton of tapes.
Oh, I'm sure they did. And particularly given the fact that the address is just one CNN center. It's not even care of WCW. So I figure like there's a news intern for CNN that's, sifting through tapes of, breaking news stories that have come in. And then they've got like a Nitro Party from LSU that they've got to watch and see if it's, airable.
We see clips from Thunder. Bischoff telling Arn Anderson that the Horsemen are history. He says they can arm wrestle left-handed if Arn wants Flair to be able to wrestle again. They'll do that next week on Thunder.
The obvious story there being that Arn Anderson had to retire due to nerve damage that led to his left hand being, if not completely unusable, largely, particularly for the purposes of gripping an arm wrestling contest, that would not work.
No, not at all. We now go to hour number 3. More pyro.
Yes, you would get back then, for people that don't remember or weren't around back then, Nitro, you would get pyro to start the show. You get pyro for the transition from hour 1 to hour 2, and you'd get pyro for the transition for hour 2 to hour 3. I even recall an episode of Nitro that we watched for the podcast, I want to say maybe in season 2, where I think it was Bam Bam Bigelow had a match. Someone had a match, and in the middle of the match, while the wrestlers are in the ring, the pyro is going off, and like Bam Bam just grabs the hold. He's like, I'm going to wait this out.
Yeah, it's so funny. Hour number 3 starts with a match. The Giant, Paul White, The Big Show. The Giant taking on Meng. I'm so excited for this match.
Well, I'm excited going in, and by the end, my excitement is even higher. This was freaking awesome.
So awesome.
So different from anything you would otherwise ever see on a WCW show, on a WWF show. It was not a shoot, obviously, but it was that great cooperative, uncooperative style that, Minoru Suzuki has made into an art form. You see that here on full display. This is short. It's brutal. It's not pretty. It's violent. It is perfect.
It is so great. And like, I know that these two guys are going to do I thought that this was going to be great, and I had high hopes for greatness. This blew me away of how much fun it was, because these two dudes were just smacking each other so hard. They're wildly swinging away at each other. Both guys are trading shots. They're no-selling stuff.
Well, they like break up and reset, which you normally don't see in this era, or in terms of 1998 or even through to modern era wrestling. Like, this was short and compact and violent, but these resets almost remind you of like wrestling you'd see in Japan in the 70s or 80s.
Yeah, so much fun. You have Ming with a big boot to the face of the Giant, who is tall, and then he goes for the tongue and death grip, but Giant uses his long reach to get the choke on. So he's holding him in a choke, and Meng can't get the tongue and death grip on because the reach is just too long from the Giant, keeping him at bay. Oh, so creative, so fun.
Never seen anything like that before. Ming has his arm fully outstretched, and it's just inches away from his fingers being able to lock the tongue and death grip on, like you said. Giant's a little bit longer, and he can grab that choke.
And he turns it into a choke slam for the pin. I can't believe it was like 2 minutes, and it was so much fun. Thumbs up all around. Great job, WCW, for putting this out. Again, you had this great high-flying cruiserweight action. You've got the two big dudes smacking each other around, and you've got a main event with two huge superstars in Goldberg and Sting, and you're going to get a Ric Flair promo here in a minute. What a show. Like, I'm recapping it already because I'm already so excited about it. Like,
when was, like, I honestly can't remember the last time there was a satisfying, competitive 2-minute match. Usually short matches are squashes. You got to get at least 5 minutes before you can feel satisfied by a match. Really, you want maybe 8 minutes. Here, this couldn't have been more than 2.5 minutes, and it was captivating. It was, you could not turn your eyes away from this.
No. Half of the WCW Tag Team Champions, Scott Hall, comes out with Vincent.
And the tag belts, which you can be forgiven if you don't remember what these belts look like, because this is the era of WCW where Bischoff basically wanted to kill the tag team division. You never had tag team title matches almost ever. And at one point, they just kind of quietly didn't have the belts on at all.
And so we talked about all the great things. Now we can also remind you of all the Nitro-y WCW things that also pop up, and this is one of them. Hall's acting drunk, and he's drinking out of a cup while Vincent's got a bottle in a brown bag.
And this is that same story a few weeks earlier, but this is the same storyline that we would see on that episode of Thunder that we reviewed, which started with Scott Hall in the bar and on location Mike Tenay again trying to talk to him.
He does the "Hey yo, survey time. Is anyone here to see WCW?" And I actually got a good response. This is one of the towns that you'll get that good response. He's like, "Are you here to see the original Black and White Express?" The people were not. And then, "Are you here to see the lame Wolfpack?" And the NWO Wolfpack got a pretty good response as well. But survey says one more for the good guys. Hall's opponent is the NWO Wolfpack's Lex Luger.
What a weird vibe here. At least this is not goateed Luger trying to look cool, but Lex Luger coming out to the Wolfpack hip-hop theme song in his black jeans, throwing up the Too Sweet. It's so strange. It was always weird to see Luger or Sting in any version of the NWO, even the Wolfpack, but it was even weirder seeing Luger. This was odd.
Yeah, lots of stalling. Hall won't lock up. He steps out for a quick drink. He drunkenly stumbles coming back into the ring, and he does a bunch of shenanigans. Luger pushes him in the corner, yelling, "You're messed up. Knock it off. Someone's going to get hurt." And Bischoff comes down, and Hall and Nash and Conan, but they're not coming out in character. They're coming out because they're concerned for Scott Hall, the person. And Hall's ranting at them, like, you don't drink. And then he, quote, pukes on Bischoff to end a terrible, terrible segment.
This sucked. Stuff like this sucks. in 2023 as we record this. It was not entertaining in 1998. Don't let anyone fool you. This was not something where people are like, oh my God, they're really breaking barriers here. They're breaking new ground with this work shoot with Scott Hall. This sucked back then too. I don't need this stuff. When I watch a wrestling show, I want to watch wrestling, and I don't want anything on the show that screams to me, what you're watching is fake, but hear this one thing during this segment. This is the real stuff. Get out of here with that garbage.
No, and there's a way you can do this Scott Hall story and actually like make it something. But trying to do the work shoot thing was a very, playing to the internet fans, and this stuff was a very 98 all the way through early 2000s thing to do. But it was in its infancy here, but.
In its infancy for WCW too. I mean, this is pre-Russo, but this sort of hinted at what we would see in the Russo era of WCW. The other thing beyond it just being work shoot garbage is that it was pretty distasteful too. I'd have to imagine it was pretty high in the most disgusting promotional tactics for 1998 in the Observer newsletter, because Scott Hall, even back then, had very well-known substance abuse problems. And so then here you had the guy who has actually had these problems playing a character having these problems, basically mocking his own issues. And it's also wild when you think about, in the same general time frame, we had the same thing happening in the WWF with Road Warrior Hawk.
After commercial, J.J. Dillon is back in the ring. He calls out Arn Anderson, and here we go. Anderson gets in the ring and cuts an awesome promo. Arn Anderson, good promo.
Yes.
He says, when 15,000 people blow the roof off the place, that's what a pop smells like. And tonight is a new beginning for the Four Horsemen. Loud, we want Flair chants. Arn says, trust me, everybody's going to get what they want tonight.
It was masterful from Arn in this promo, because he very easily, this whole thing, the story he was trying to tell, which is an important part of the overall story of the segment, was on the verge of getting completely hijacked by we want Flair chants. And he acknowledged it. He told the people that's what they're going to get, and he brought them back to wanting to hear what he had to say. Just great stuff from Arn.
He calls out the other three horsemen, Mongo McMichael, Steve Mongo McMichael, Chris Benoit, and Dean Malenko. He runs down why each one of these guys are awesome. Arn Anderson then, he says, he says he hears all the time, Arn Anderson, bring back the horsemen. He goes, I'm not responsible for what happens next. We don't wear white hats. We're not nice guys. Loved it. Loved it.
Arn was so great here, and it was so frustrating, because as awesome as this was, all you can think of is how they dropped the ball over and over and over again with this version of the Horsemen after this. Like, there's so much that they could have done, and there's an alternate reality where what Arn said here is really what happens, but it's not what we got. But we'll live in the moment of this night, this segment, and how amazing this was.
He goes, I almost forgot the fourth horseman. Ric Flair, get down here. And Jesus, this place went crazy. Flair is near tears as he's coming down the aisle to the ring. He gets in the ring, and the people had an incredible pop when he came out, and they just get louder. It was like a wave of this is one of the most incredible ovations and returns, like Flair and Greenville. This was special. This was a real special moment.
Well, and real being the real word. This was real emotion from people who had seen this guy through their childhood into their adulthood. Maybe a lot of these people have kids now as well. Neither you nor I were here, or were there, I should say, in Greenville, South Carolina for this show. However, as Ric Flair came out, the only thing I could think of is that maybe the only thing that would have rivaled this from a local emotion standpoint and the way it played out in the building and then across the television viewing universe would have been CM Punk's return in August of 2021 in Chicago at the United Center. You and I were both there for that, and it's hard to even put into words just the you say passion, you say fervor. That doesn't even do justice to the emotional response that the crowd had and how long it went on, how it built and built and built. That's what this felt like watching it through the TV screen.
Yeah, this was an incredible moment, and Ric Flair was taking it all in and then proceeds to cut a promo where he's talking about, you mentioned, it's a real life situation. And he's talking about Bischoff, telling him to disband the Horsemen. Bischoff comes down to the ring. Flair takes off his jacket and he's yelling at him. And here we'll let you hear about the abuse of power.
Could that be true that the most elite group that Eric Bischoff said was dead is alive and well? Bischoff, this might be my only shot. And I gotta tell you, I'm gonna make it my best. Is this what you call a great moment in TV? It's wrong, because this is real. This is not bought and paid for. It's a real life situation. Just like the night in Columbia, South Carolina, when you looked at me, tears in my eyes, and said, God, that's good TV. It was real. Arn Anderson passed the torch. It was real, damn it. You think Sting was crying in the dressing room like I was on TV if it wasn't real? This guy, my best friend, is one of the greatest performers to ever live, and you squashed him in one night. Then you get on the phone and tell me, disband the Horsemen, they're dead. Disband the Horsemen. Me, you know what? I looked at myself in the mirror the next day and I saw a pathetic figure that gave up and quit. And for that, I owe you, the wrestling fans, I owe these guys an apology, because it won't happen again. We're Reunite and Bischoff, for no matter what you think. Yeah, no, you're right, you're an overbearing asshole. That's right. You're an obnoxious, overbearing ass. Abuse of power. You. Abuse of power. Cut me off. Come on. You will never, ever wrestle abuse of power. You suck. I hate your guts. I hate your guts. Show your history. You are a liar. You're a cheat. You're a scam. You are a no good son of a bitch. Fire me. I'm already fired. Fire me. I'm already fired.
Fire me. I'm already fired, Adam.
The best line. The best line. The only thing that would have been better is if 11 years prior, Ole Anderson had said that to Ric Flair when he confronted Ric Flair at the Worldwide set when Flair was basically firing him.
Yeah, what a segment. Dave Meltzer, Wrestling Observer Newsletter, says, Flair had a moment reserved for few athletes in history, none of whom are wrestlers. Not even Antonio Inoki or El Santo, the modern equivalent of the day when a dying Lou Gehrig came to Yankee Stadium and talked about being the luckiest man alive.
When you watch it, like if you're just hearing us say that, you're hearing Dave Meltzer say that, you might not believe it. When you watch this, That's what it's like. It is a guy who still has many miles to go in his life, basically getting to feel what it would be like to be there, like when you are being eulogized and having thousands and thousands and thousands of people show their love. He got to experience that in real time. And then 10 years later in the WWF or in WWE, experienced that again at his retirement ceremony on Raw the night after WrestleMania.
After commercial, Shivani is there, and you've never seen a guy loving a moment as much as Tony Schiavone is loving this and talking about how great this is. Like,
and honestly trying to like hold back tears himself, even after the break.
He was genuinely moved by all this, and he's been there for so long, and so this was special for him to be a part of as well. DDP, Diamond Dallas Page, joins the booth. They're showing us stills from Fall Brawl, and then we go to the ring for our main event. Michael Buffer is in the ring to introduce the main event, the WCW World Heavyweight Championship, the challenger, the NWO Wolfpack's Sting, challenging the WCW champion, the undefeated Bill Goldberg. And we get the full walk from the dressing room to the entrance to the ring.
Almost eats it coming out of the locker room. He walks out, the police escort is there, and I assume there's something wet on the floor. He slips, but maintains his composure. But if you're watching closely, you realize how close he came to having a really embarrassing moment on live television. If I was WCW, I would be embarrassed, though, to be having Sting come out, not with his own music, but coming out to that Wolfpack music again. Again, it's not quite as weird as Luger, but still Sting coming out to that music. He's got long hair now. He's basically got a black and red version of the black and white Crow gear, but he's not being dark and mysterious at all. He's much more of like the Surfer Sting vibe as far as how he's acting. The thing I can't get past, though, and I've never been able to get past this, 25 years in, I still think about this every time I see Wolfpack Sting, is why when the Great Muta wore red face paint did it look cool? And why when Sting wore red face paint did it look so bad and dumb and weird?
It's not. This wasn't a good look at all for Sting. No,
it's kind of a mess. The long hair, the red. Maybe it's the shade of red. Like I feel like the kind of darker red and the type of face paint on the Great Muta, like it looked like face paint. Whereas Sting, he looks like a Valentine's Day sugar cookie with long hair. It's just, I don't know. It doesn't work.
What did work was this entrance for Goldberg. I love the full walk for the champion, and like he's flanked by security, bringing him out. Like you get the big fight feel. Like big boxing matches do this, MMA matches do this. You get the big long entrance for the stars. I think this is tremendous. They should bring this back.
I love it. And the other thing, we saw AEW try to do that with Wardlow and then kind of get rid of it. The other thing that we say it all the time when we see Goldberg, in the midst of his run in WCW, but like you see it here and WCW only has 2.5 years left at this point. But you see this guy who is a WCW guy through and through, a creation of WCW, a guy who took off organically, and it really hits you that like you're in Greenville, South Carolina. He's wrestling Sting. We're seeing this reaction to Ric Flair. DDP is on commentary, another WCW through and through guy that just took off out of nowhere. And you're seeing that like this is the last guy, the last real WCW guy that made it big and became a megastar. And at the time, like I remember watching, and while yes, WCW was starting to lose the ratings war, it didn't feel like WCW was going to die. You felt like you're going to have so many more moments like this and so many more guys like Goldberg to come. But instead, like this was it.
This was it. First move of the match. Oh, before we get into it, Bobby Heenan on commentary, he mentions that when this match was happening, they were 8 days away from the 1 year anniversary of Goldberg's debut. He was still a rookie. And this insane. Over and crazy popular.
Not only still a rookie, but like at that time before that, like, yes, he got a little bit of a push. They had the match where I think it was him against Hugh Morris, and he beat Hugh Morris just basically like sight unseen. He was a guy who never been mentioned on air before, but like his first few months, he was not a megastar. He had a several shows long feud, including on a pay-per-view with Steve McMichael, that while he didn't drop a fall, like in terms of the feud, it was 50-50. So like we're really only maybe 7 months, 8 months tops into Goldberg being the Goldberg that we'd all know and love.
First move of the match is a power slam by Goldberg. Sting answers by picking up Goldberg and ramming him into the corner. Vertical suplex, and Goldberg pops right back up, and the place goes crazy for Goldberg.
Yeah, again, like Sting is popular, and Sting has been around in WCW for like 10 years at this point. But you see the levels of popularity. Obviously, Ric Flair, that's a completely different thing. That's a situation outside of wrestling on this show. But when you see that Goldberg is this much more popular than Sting, the ultimate WCW guy, it really drives home just what a phenomenon Bill Goldberg was at this point.
Big strikes by Goldberg puts Sting down. Sting hits a drop kick. Goldberg pops up, takes him down, and with his wacky leg submission, but Sting is in the ropes.
Yep, Bill Goldberg, who watched the UFC and fancied himself a bit of a kind of a wannabe MMA practitioner, at least he's really, I can't think of anyone else in North American wrestling at this point that was really incorporating that stuff into their matches, because while Ken Shamrock was in the WWF, we've talked about it, Shamrock really wasn't doing any of these techniques.
Sting reverses a tombstone and hits Goldberg with a tombstone.
Yeah, it's not quite, you can't powerbomb Kidman, but it's very rare that anyone hits a tombstone on Sting, and particularly when it's someone who never uses it, you know Sting is reversing that all in one motion and hitting the tombstone.
Stinger splash in the corner. He hits another Stinger splash, hits a third, and Goldberg shrugs it off. Goes for a charge in the corner, but Sting moves and chop blocks the knee of Goldberg. He goes for the Scorpion Deathlock, and he gets it applied. Goldberg tries to power out, but Sting, he's barely holding on.
He almost goes into the Daniel Garcia version of the Scorpion Deathlock towards the end of this. The people, by the way, like we said, the people are for Goldberg, but they are also for Sting, to be fair. When he just crosses the legs of Goldberg before he even turns him over, this place comes unglued like a Road Warrior entrance pop. This is crazy.
Sting gets situated again, locks the Scorpion Deathlock on a little bit better this time, and Hogan hits the ring, hits Sting. The referee somehow did not see this.
Yeah, this is, you talk about ref incompetence nowadays. Every bit as bad in 1998 as, again, Hogan gets into the ring. The ref is looking at Goldberg and Sting, looking for the submission. But it's not as if this happens behind the referee, because, again, the referee is looking at these two men to call the submission, but he doesn't notice, I guess.
Yeah, Goldberg hits a spear on Sting, hits the jackhammer, gets the victory. Hogan jumps Goldberg from behind. Bret Hart runs in, chases Hogan to help out Goldberg. Goldberg helps up Sting after the match. They celebrate as the show goes off the air. Sting was awesome here. Not a lot of guys, like there were some guys that could get a really good match out of Goldberg, and like in a short period of time, right? You don't have a lot of time when you're in a Goldberg match. But there were guys like when William Regal would wrestle Goldberg, it was like, oh my God, this is so awesome. And Sting's another guy. Like those two, like Sting had some pretty good chemistry with Goldberg here, and they had a great match.
He had good chemistry with Goldberg, and it was honestly, to me, while I wouldn't say it was one of the best matches of Sting's career, it's one of the most impressive performances, because
very much so. Yeah.
He has to be a completely different type of wrestler than Sting is in almost every other big match that he's in. It's like he had a John Cena formula per se, but he was, the underdog. He was like, it's a very different style of Sting performance. Very impressive. The other thing, just as I'm watching this, and yes, the finish of this sucked, but it was TV, so you're going to get that. Like you're watching Goldberg come out, you're watching Sting come out, you're watching these guys do this match, and the people are coming unglued. We had just seen what we saw with Ric Flair. We had just seen prior to that, earlier on in the show, the stuff with Billy Kidman and Juvi. And I'm watching this, and as somebody who was a WCW kid, I'm just getting pissed off. I'm watching this, I'm thinking, how the hell did you screw this up? You had it. You had something so good and so organic that appealed to every different type of wrestling fan you could have, and you screwed it up. Still pisses me off 25 years later.
It's pretty incredible to see a show like this where they got so many things right. I mean that there's so much to love. And at this point in time, it was, remember, segment by segment. They're comparing, this is a ratings war. This is a Monday Night War.
Minute by minute, not just segment by segment, minute by minute ratings reports both companies were getting and reacting in real time on the air to how they were doing the shows as a result.
So let's talk about the ratings real quick for this show. Nitro wound up with a 4.54 rating and a 6.9 share. Raw did a 3.99 rating and a 6.0 share. The biggest gap of the regular 2-hour show was when WCW trotted out the reemergence of the Four Horsemen, which did a 5.44 rating, while Raw put out Mark Henry handicap match against China and X-Pac, and then an evening gown stripping you down match between Sable and Jacqueline, which wound up with Jacqueline's breast being exposed, and they showed that again on a replay as well.
And they still didn't come close.
And they
to winning
still
that
got
segment.
trounced. So it was 5.44 for WCW in the Horseman segment, 3.79 for that other segment. It absolutely got destroyed head to head.
It shows you the power of Ric Flair as a ratings draw in WCW at this point, because again, we are past the point of WCW being on an 83-week winning streak. We're now in the era which we've talked about on other recent episodes of the WWF clawing back wins and starting to pull away. But not here on this night, particularly, like you said, not when Ric Flair was on the television screen.
Yeah, the main events were interesting as well. The ring introductions in the first 6 minutes of the main event of Raw, which was Steve Austin versus Ken Shamrock for the first time for the WWF Championship. The WWF's peak rating of the night was 4.87 for that match. Nitro, during that same period, was airing the ring entrance for Bill Goldberg and Sting. It dropped down to a 4.26.
Wow.
But what was amazing was the turnover, since it was coming off of 5.44 for the Flair segment. And so what happened was everybody switched the channel after the Flair segment over to WWF to go see the beginning there. And then when you came to the overrun, which saw the last 6 minutes of Austin and Shamrock and the post-match run-ins on that show, Raw fell to a 4.06, while Nitro, with the actual Goldberg-Sting match and their run-ins, ballooned up to a 6.07.
Wow.
So everybody switched over because they were
insane.
so like during the entrances and everything for the Goldberg-Sting match, they flipped over to WWF to watch that main event. As soon as the main event actually started on Nitro, everybody flipped the channel back over to watch Goldberg and Sting. Unbelievable.
It's insane. And what it also tells you is that, like, when you hear people talk about the casual fans, and that's what drove the Monday Night Wars era, it's not entirely true, because nobody who is casual is going to care enough and know enough about what's going on in two competing wrestling shows on the same night to be flipping back and forth in those big of numbers, depending on what was happening. It's hard to explain to people who did not live through that time period just how huge wrestling was at that time and how in tune people were to what was happening on both shows. And the fact that, yes, you had people who were like, I was much more of a WCW fan. You had people who were much more WWF fans, but even those people were constantly going back and forth between the shows, and they had their priorities based on, you know, what was more interesting, who they liked more.
Yeah, and this was this was a heck of a show. A lot. We talked about a lot of our favorite things. We know our favorite things here throughout. So I'm gonna ask you least favorite thing on this show.
it's hard to not say the never-ending Kendall Windham Perry Saturn match, but I'm going to go with everything about WCW putting Davey Boy Smith out there in the ring that night. Everyone should have known better. It was clear that he was in no shape to go out there, and that was sad to watch.
Yeah, and it didn't need it. This show didn't need it.
No. And they had so many other guys on the roster. You're telling me there was nobody else they could have put in the ring for a 3-minute match against the Barbarian?
Jim Neidhart wasn't going to wrestle. You could have had anybody come out and moved and just moved out of the way of the Warrior.
It could have been Davey Boy. Davey Boy could have been that guy that had the match that didn't happen.
Exactly.
And then you do Neidhart and Barbarian.
And you could have cut the Kendall Windham match in half and given me anything else.
Again, you
anything else.
Hundreds of people on that roster. Think of all the cruiserweights you had that weren't on this show. All the luchadors you had that weren't on this show. You could add Sick Boy wrestle a match for all I care. So many other options.
But this was a great show. I love it. It's definitely in the top 5 of my favorite Nitros of all time. I remember this Horseman segment when it went down, how amazing it was in real time. It still holds up today to watch, and just absolutely incredible. So thank you to Patron Kendall for bringing this back into my life, getting to sit down and relive this episode of Nitro. I can see why it's one of your favorites, and it was super funny because he gave us the episode number, and when we pulled it up, the thumbnail on the clip that to bring up the show, you immediately know what episode this was.
Yeah.
And
I'm like, Ric Flair is crying in a tux. It's 1998. It's that episode. But the thing, again, to our point as we close this out, was that if it just had that on a 3-hour show, if that was the only memorable thing or the only really well executed thing, it still would have been a really good Nitro. But you had that. You had Juvi and Kidman making Billy Kidman in one night. You had that awesome fight between the Giant and Ming.
Giant.
You had just Sting and Goldberg, even if the finish wasn't great, just the spectacle of those two guys wrestling each other and the crowd investment into the entrances. What a show.
Yeah. No, this is great. And this is why we do this podcast, to relive
Absolutely.
great wrestling things for you. Because maybe you haven't seen that. Maybe a listener here hasn't seen that and wants to go check it out now. You know that you should. And with that, we're going to wrap it up. We're going to call it a podcast. If you want to send in your intentionalized picks, you can just bump yourself up to that tier via your Patreon. Go ahead and bump up. Send us a message. Say, hey, can you watch the show? As long as it's over 10 years old, the answer is yes, we will watch that show. And then you can bump yourself back down, continue to get all the bonus content. We review it, and keep sending them in. And we've got the queue is built up. We're going to continue to do this throughout the season break. So definitely looking forward to seeing these intentionalized picks continue to roll in. So thank you to Patron Kendall. Thank you for joining us, Adam.
Yes. Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you to all our patrons who make the show possible. Thank you to Kendall for literally making this week's episode possible. And yeah, thank you to WCW. This was fun.
Absolutely. Thanks again, everyone, for listening, and we'll talk to you again next time.